David never believed in aliens. As a computer programmer working from his home office in Phoenix, he spent most nights debugging code and fixing software problems. His wife Lisa thought he worked too much, but someone had to pay the bills. That Tuesday night in March started like any other ordinary evening. Lisa had gone to bed around 10:30, leaving David alone with his 3 computer monitors and a cup of cold coffee. He was trying to fix a payment system for a client when something strange happened. All 3 screens started flickering at exactly 2:47 in the morning. The strange thing was, they weren't connected to the same power source. David tried rebooting the computers, but instead of his normal desktop, weird patterns appeared on every screen. They looked like geometric shapes moving in perfect harmony, creating designs that hurt his eyes to look at. The patterns seemed to pulse with their own light, getting brighter and dimmer in a rhythm that reminded him of breathing. The room got cold suddenly. Not the kind of cold you get from air conditioning, but something deeper. The kind of cold that makes your bones ache. David pulled his sweater tighter and checked the thermostat, but it still showed 72 degrees. That's when he heard it. A low humming sound, like electricity running through water. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. David looked around his cluttered office, trying to find the source. His coffee mug was vibrating on the desk, making tiny circles in the puddle of condensation underneath the dot. The humming got louder, and the air in front of his desk started to shimmer like heat waves, rising from summer pavement. David rubbed his eyes, thinking he was just tired from staring at screens all day. But when he opened them again, the shimmer had grown larger, about the size of a doorway. 3 figures stepped through the shimmering air. David's first thought was that he was having some kind of breakdown. The figures were shorter than humans, maybe 5 feet tall, with smooth gray skin that seemed to glow softly in the dim light of his office. Their heads were larger than they should be, with huge black eyes that reflected the light from his computer screens. One of them looked directly at David, and suddenly he couldn't move. Not paralyzed exactly, but like his body had forgotten how to respond to his brain. He could still breathe and blink, but his arms and legs felt like they were made of concrete. Then came the voice, but not through his ears. The words appeared in his mind, clear as if someone was standing next to him and speaking. David Chen, software engineer, born July 15, 1989, married to Lisa Chen for 6 years. No children. You have been selected. The voice was neither male nor female, just information being placed directly into his thoughts. David tried to speak, to ask what they meant, but no sound came from his throat. Another voice joined the first, this one somehow different, though. David couldn't explain how. Subject shows optimal genetic markers. Neural pathways are compatible. Resistance levels are within acceptable parameters. David wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but his body refused to obey. The beings moved closer, and he could see details he wished he couldn't. Their skin wasn't smooth up close, but covered in tiny scales that shifted colors slightly as they moved. They had no visible nose, just the small slits where a nose should be. No ears either, just smooth curves on the sides of their oversized heads. The third being, who hadn't spoken yet, reached into what David realized was some kind of pouch or bag attached to its waist. It pulled out a device that looked like a cross between a pen and a small drill. The tip glowed with the same soft light as their skin. This will allow us to monitor your progress and locate you when needed, the first voice said in his mind. Do not resist. Resistance will only cause unnecessary discomfort. David felt a sharp pain behind his right ear, like a bee sting that went deeper than it should. The pain lasted only a second, but he could feel something small and hard under his skin afterward. Something that didn't belong there. The being stepped back, and David found he could move his fingers again, then his hands, then his arms. By the time he could stand up, the shimmer in the air was already fading, and the 3 figures were becoming transparent. We will return when you are ready for the next phase, the voice said, growing fainter. Do not attempt to remove the tracking device. Do not tell others about this encounter. Such actions would be unwise. The shimmer disappeared completely, taking the beings with it. The humming stopped. The geometric patterns faded from his computer screens, replaced by normal error messages about lost network connections. The room temperature returned to normal so quickly that David wondered if he'd imagined the cold. But he hadn't imagined the pain behind his ear. He reached up and touched the spot gently. There was definitely something under his skin. Small and round, like a grain of rice. It was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse slightly, as if it had its own heartbeat. David looked around his office. Everything appeared normal except for 3 small burn marks on his wooden desk, arranged in a perfect triangle where the beings had been standing. The marks went deep into the wood, as if something extremely hot had been placed there. His hands were shaking as he took photos of the burn marks with his phone. The images came out blurry, distorted by the same kind of interference that had affected his computers. He tried several times, but every photo showed nothing but static and strange light patterns. David saved his work and shut down his computers, moving like a person in a dream. He checked the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked, though he realized that locks probably wouldn't stop beings who could walk through thin air. He climbed the stairs quietly, not wanting to wake Lisa. She was sleeping peacefully on her side, breathing slowly and evenly. David stood in the doorway watching her for a long moment, wondering if he should tell her what had happened. But the beings had warned him not to tell anyone. David barely slept that night. Every sound made him jump, every shadow seemed to hide impossible figures. When morning came, he almost convinced himself it had all been a very vivid dream brought on by too much caffeine and too little sleep. Then he touched the spot behind his ear again and felt the small, warm object beneath his skin. The burn marks were still on his desk. This wasn't a dream. This was his new reality. Whether he wanted it or not, as he made coffee and tried to pretend everything was normal. David had no idea that this was just the beginning. The beings who had visited him weren't done with him, not even close, and when they came back, they would bring friends. The next 2 weeks turned David's life upside down. What started as one terrifying night became a pattern that made him question his own sanity. The beings didn't just visit once and disappear. They came back again and again, like they owned his house. It always started the same way. David would be working late, or sometimes just watching television with Lisa when the temperature would drop. Then came that humming sound, like electricity mixed with music from another world. Lisa never seemed to notice. She would keep talking or sleeping as if nothing was happening, while David watched the air shimmer and bend. The first few times, they appeared in his office, but then they started showing up in other rooms. David found them in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, standing around the island like they were having a meeting. Another time, he woke up to use the bathroom and found one of them standing in the hallway, just watching him. They never spoke out loud, but their voices in his head became as familiar as his own thoughts. Always the same message: you are progressing as expected. Do not resist the process. What process? David tried asking, but they never answered his questions directly. Instead, they would touch that device behind his ear, and he would feel a strange tingling sensation spread through his entire body. After these sessions, David would lose hours of time. He would be sitting at his computer at 10 p.m. Then suddenly it would be 4 in the morning, and he would be lying on his couch, still in his clothes, with no memory of how he got there. Sometimes, he would find himself in his car in the garage, keys in the ignition, but no memory of planning to go anywhere. The worst part was the marks. David started finding small, circular burns on his arms and chest. They appeared overnight, perfectly round and about the size of a quarter. They didn't hurt exactly, but they felt warm to the touch and took weeks to fade. When Lisa asked about them, David made up stories about accidents at work or bumping into things. Lying to his wife was eating him alive, but every time he thought about telling her the truth, he remembered the being's warning. Such actions would be unwise. He didn't want to find out what that meant. His work started falling apart. David had always been reliable, finishing projects on time and solving problems that stumped other programmers. But now he couldn't focus for more than a few minutes at a time. He would start writing code and then find himself staring at a blank screen an hour later, with no memory of what he was supposed to be doing. His client meetings became disasters. David would zone out in the middle of conversations, sometimes for several minutes at a time. One client asked if he was feeling okay because he had stopped talking mid-sentence and just stared at the wall for 5 minutes straight. Lisa noticed the changes but blamed them on stress and lack of sleep. She bought him vitamins and suggested he take a vacation. "You've been working too hard," she would say, rubbing his shoulders while he sat at his desk. "Maybe we should go visit my parents for a weekend." David wanted nothing more than to get away from the house, but something told him it wouldn't matter. The beings had put that device in his head. They could probably find him anywhere. The sleep problems got worse. David was afraid to go to bed because he never knew where he would wake up. Sometimes he would fall asleep in his office chair and wake up in the backyard, standing barefoot in the grass at sunrise. Other times, Lisa would find him sleepwalking and guide him back to bed. But he had no memory of getting up. He started keeping a journal, writing down everything he could remember about each encounter. The beings always appeared between midnight and 4 a.m. They stayed for exactly 37 minutes each time. They were most interested in touching the device behind his ear and making him look at strange images that appeared in his mind. The images were the worst part. David would see Earth from space, but not as it looked now. In these visions, the planet was covered in structures that definitely weren't human-made. Massive geometric buildings that seemed to pulse with their own light, connected by bridges that floated in the air without any visible support. Sometimes the beings would show him crowds of people, but the people looked different. Their eyes were larger, their skin had a slight gray tint, and they moved in perfect synchronization, like they were all following the same invisible conductor. "This is your world's future," one of the voices would say in his head. "This is what you are helping to create." David didn't want to help create anything like that. He tried to resist, to close his mind to the images, but it was like trying to stop himself from breathing. The visions came whether he wanted them or not. His physical health started declining too. David had always been in decent shape, but now he was losing weight and felt tired all the time. His hands shook constantly, making it hard to type. He developed headaches that lasted for days and seemed to get worse whenever he was near electronic devices. The electronics in the house began acting up regularly. Their smart TV would turn on by itself and show static. The microwave would start running with nothing inside. Their cell phones would dial random numbers in the middle of the night. Lisa thought they needed to call a repair service, but David knew the truth. One night, about 3 weeks after the first encounter, something different happened. David was lying in bed, pretending to sleep but actually watching the ceiling for signs of the shimmer, when he heard Lisa talking in her sleep. "Yes, I understand," she said clearly, though her eyes were closed. "He's ready for the next phase." David's blood turned to ice water. He shook Lisa gently, and she woke up confused, asking what was wrong. She had no memory of speaking, and when David told her what she had said, she laughed it off as a weird dream. But David knew better. The beings weren't just targeting him anymore. They were affecting Lisa too, even if she didn't realize it. The thought of his wife being pulled into this nightmare made him feel sick. That's when David realized he had two choices. He could keep pretending this wasn't happening and let the beings slowly take over his life and Lisa's life too. Or he could find a way to fight back, even though he had no idea how to battle creatures who could walk through walls and control his mind. The device behind his ear pulsed warmer as he made his decision, like it was reading his thoughts. Maybe it was, but David didn't care anymore. He was done being their victim. He was going to find a way to protect himself and Lisa, no matter what it took. He just had to figure out how to fight an enemy that existed beyond everything he thought he understood about reality. Everything changed on a Thursday night in April. Lisa had been having trouble sleeping for the past week, tossing and turning like something was bothering her deep down. David pretended to be asleep, but he was really watching for any sign of the beings. They usually came around 2 in the morning, and it was already past midnight. Lisa had been acting strange lately. She would stop talking in the middle of conversations and stare at nothing, just like David did during his episodes. She started forgetting simple things like where she put her keys or what she had for lunch. David was terrified that the beings were starting to affect her too, but he still couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. That night, David felt the familiar chill creep into their bedroom. The humming sound started low, so quiet that most people would miss it, but David had learned to recognize even the faintest vibration. He kept his eyes closed and tried to breathe normally, hoping they would just do whatever they needed to do and leave Lisa alone. The air near their dresser started to shimmer, and 3 figures stepped through. David had seen them so many times that he could tell them apart now. One was slightly taller than the others, with longer fingers. Another had a small scar-like mark across its oversized forehead. The third one always carried different devices and seemed to be in charge of the procedures they performed on him. But this time, instead of approaching David, they moved to Lisa's side of the bed. David's heart started pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it through barely open eyes. He watched as the tall one reached toward his sleeping wife. That's when Lisa's eyes snapped open. For a moment, nobody moved. Lisa stared directly at the gray figure standing next to her bed, its large black eyes reflecting the dim light from their digital alarm clock. David expected her to scream or faint or at least look confused. Instead, Lisa's face went through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, fear, and then something David had never seen in her before: pure rage. "Get away from my husband," Lisa said in a voice so cold and steady that it scared David more than anything the beings had ever done to him. The tall being tilted its head, and David heard its voice in his mind, though he wasn't sure if Lisa could hear it too. The secondary subject is experiencing unexpected awareness. This was not anticipated. Lisa sat up slowly, never taking her eyes off the creature. "I said get away from him." The scarred being stepped forward and reached out its long fingers toward Lisa's forehead, probably trying to put her back to sleep or make her forget what she was seeing. But when its skin touched hers, something incredible happened. The being jerked its hand back like it had been burned. A soft blue light flickered around Lisa's head for just a second, then disappeared. All 3 creatures took a step backward, which was the first time David had ever seen them show what looked like surprise or fear. "Impossible," the third voice said in David's mind. "She has natural resistance. The neural pathways cannot be accessed." Lisa looked at David, who was still pretending to sleep, then back at the beings. "I know what you've been doing to him. I've known for weeks. The missing time, the marks on his body, the way he stares at nothing like his mind is somewhere else. I just didn't want to believe it." She stood up, and David noticed she was holding something in her right hand. It was the baseball bat he kept by the bed for protection. Though he had never imagined needing protection from something like this. "Lisa, don't," David whispered, finally dropping the pretense of being asleep. "They're dangerous." "No," Lisa said, still staring at the beings. "They're bullies, and I don't like bullies." The tall being spoke directly to Lisa this time, and somehow David could hear it too. "You do not understand the importance of what we are doing. Your spouse has been selected for integration. This process benefits your entire species." Lisa raised the bat like she was ready to swing at a fastball. "I don't care if you're trying to save the universe. Nobody touches my family without permission." What happened next was something David would never forget as long as he lived. Lisa didn't just threaten the beings, she charged at them. The bat passed right through the tall one, but somehow her presence, her sheer determination and fury, seemed to disrupt whatever energy they were made of. The shimmer around them became unstable, flickering like a bad television signal. The scarred being tried to grab Lisa, but the same blue light appeared around her again, brighter this time. When the creature touched the light, it made a sound like electricity shorting out and stumbled backward. "This is not possible," the third voice said, sounding almost panicked. "No human has shown this level of resistance." "Well, you haven't met Lisa before," David said. getting out of bed to stand next to his wife for the first time in weeks. He felt like himself again, like he had some control over what was happening to him. Lisa looked at him with tears in her eyes. "David, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this sooner. I should have helped you." "How long have you known?" David asked. "I started waking up during their visits about 2 weeks ago," Lisa said, never lowering the bat. "At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I started noticing things. The way you would disappear from bed and come back hours later. The burns on your skin. The way you would zone out in the middle of conversations. I didn't want to say anything because I thought you might be having some kind of breakdown." The beings seemed to be having a discussion among themselves, their large eyes reflecting light as they looked back and forth at each other. David couldn't hear their thoughts anymore. Like Lisa's presence was blocking his connection to them. Finally, the tall one spoke again. "This complicates our timeline. The secondary subject cannot be allowed to interfere with the integration process. Try me," Lisa said, taking a step toward them with the bat ready. The scar being pulled out a device that looked like a small silver pyramid. It pointed the device at Lisa, and a beam of pale light shot toward her. But instead of hitting her, the light seemed to bend around that blue glow that surrounded her, like water flowing around a rock. "The female possesses an immunity we have not encountered before," the third voice said. "Recommend immediate withdrawal and reassessment. Recommend you leave my husband alone and never come back," Lisa said. The tall being looked directly at David. "The integration process is not complete. We will return when the secondary subject is not present." "No, you won't," Lisa said with absolute certainty, "because I'm going to figure out how to stop you. All of you. And if you hurt David again, I will find where you come from and make sure you regret it." David stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. This was the woman who apologized to spiders before putting them outside. The woman who cried during commercials with sad puppies. But now she was standing up to beings from another world, like she was ready to fight a war. The shimmer around the beings started to fade, and they began stepping backward toward where they had appeared. "This is not over," the tall one said as they became transparent. "Yes, it is," Lisa said firmly. "You just don't know it yet." The beings disappeared, taking their humming sound and unnatural cold with them. David and Lisa stood in their bedroom, breathing hard, staring at the spot where creatures from another world had just been standing. "Lisa," David said quietly, "I have so much to tell you." "I know," she said, finally lowering the bat, "and I believe every word of it. But first, we need to figure out how to make sure they never come back." David felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't facing it alone. And if the beings thought Lisa was just going to let them continue their integration process, they had seriously underestimated the woman he married. Lisa walked over to their laptop and opened it. "We're going to research everything we can. Find about alien encounters, electromagnetic interference, and anything else that might help us understand what we're dealing with. And then we're going to figure out how to fight back." David smiled for the first time in a month. The beings had made one crucial mistake. They had threatened someone Lisa loved, and that, David knew, was going to be the beginning of their end. Lisa had always been the organized one in their marriage, but David had never seen her like this. The morning after her encounter with the beings, she called in sick to work and transformed their garage into something that looked like a cross between a laboratory and a military planning room. She pushed both cars out onto the driveway and covered every surface with papers, laptops, and electronic equipment she had ordered online. David watched in amazement as his wife, who usually needed his help to program their coffee maker, began assembling devices that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. "Where did you learn how to do this?" David asked, watching. Lisa soldered tiny components onto a circuit board with the steady hands of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. "YouTube," Lisa said without looking up from her work. "Amazing what you can learn when you're motivated. Also, I've been in contact with some people who've had experiences similar to yours." That got David's attention. "Other people? How many other people?" Lisa finished the connection she was working on and looked up at him. More than you'd think. Less than there should be if we're going to fight back effectively. Over the past 2 weeks, Lisa had found online forums and chat groups where people shared stories about alien encounters. Most of the stories sounded like fantasies or mental health issues, but some rang true to David's experiences. People who described the same gray beings, the same humming sounds, the same mysterious devices implanted behind their ears. Through these connections, Lisa had made contact with Dr. Rodriguez, a former military scientist who had lost her job after reporting her own alien encounters to her superiors. Dr. Rodriguez now lived off the grid in a cabin in Montana, researching ways to defend against alien technology. She's been working on this for 15 years. Lisa explained as she tested a device that looked like a cross between a radio and a metal detector. She thinks the beings use some kind of electromagnetic field to control people's minds and power their technology. If we can disrupt that field, we might be able to stop them. The device in Lisa's hand started beeping faster and faster until it was almost a constant tone. She smiled with satisfaction. This should detect their presence from about 50 feet away. In this, she picked up what looked like a modified microwave. Should scramble their signals if they tried to mess with your head. David stared at the equipment covering their garage. Lisa, this is incredible. But are you sure it's safe? I don't want you getting hurt because of me. Lisa set down her tools and walked over to him. David, listen to me carefully. These things have been coming into our home for weeks. They've been doing experiments on you, putting devices in your body and messing with your mind. They threaten you, and now they're threatening me. Nobody does that to my family. She picked up a notebook filled with diagrams and calculations. I've been studying everything Dr. Rodriguez sent me. The beings aren't invincible. They're just using technology we don't understand yet. But every technology has weaknesses. Every system can be hacked or disrupted. David flipped through the notebook, seeing pages of electromagnetic frequency charts, circuit diagrams, and what looked like battle plans. How long have you been working on this? Since the night I first saw them, Lisa said. I just didn't tell you because I wanted to have some answers before I worried you more than you already were. Lisa had quit her job at the marketing firm without even giving 2 weeks' notice. When David asked how they would pay their bills, she showed him her laptop screen. She had been selling some of her electronic devices online to other people dealing with similar problems. Apparently, there was a small but desperate market for anti-alien technology. People are paying $500 for electromagnetic field detectors, Lisa said, pointing to her sales records. $1,000 for signal jammers. I've made more money in the last 2 weeks than I made in 3 months at my old job. But the money wasn't really the point. Lisa was building an arsenal, and every device had a specific purpose in her plan to protect David and end their nightmare once and for all. She had turned their bedroom into a monitoring station. Cameras hidden throughout the house were connected to motion sensors that would alert them the moment anything unusual appeared. The electromagnetic field detectors were positioned in every room, creating an early warning system that would give them precious seconds to prepare for an encounter. The basement became a workshop where Lisa built more advanced devices based on Dr. Rodriguez's research. She had constructed something she called a neural shield, a headband with tiny copper wires that was supposed to block telepathic communication. When David wore it, he found that the constant background buzz in his head, which he hadn't even realized was there, disappeared completely. The beings have been in your head so long that their influence feels normal now, Lisa explained. This should help block them out and give you back control of your own thoughts. Lisa had also been studying the patterns of the beings' visits. She had noticed that they always appeared between midnight and 4 a.m., usually on nights when the electromagnetic activity in the atmosphere was higher. Weather stations tracked this kind of data, and Lisa had been using it to predict when the beings were most likely to return. They're coming back tomorrow night, she said, showing David a weather report that meant nothing to him, but apparently meant everything to her. There's going to be unusual solar activity, which seems to make their technology work better. But this time, we'll be ready for them. David looked around the garage at the fruits of his wife's obsession. Motion sensors, electromagnetic pulse devices, signal jammers, and things he couldn't even begin to identify. It looked like they were preparing for war. Lisa, what if this doesn't work? What if we just make them angry? Lisa stopped working and looked at him with an expression he had never seen before. It was the look of someone who had made a decision and would not be talked out of it, no matter what the consequences might be. David, I've been doing a lot of thinking about why they chose you. Dr. Rodriguez thinks they select people who are isolated, who won't be believed if they try to tell others what's happening. They count on us being too scared or too confused to fight back. She gestured toward all the equipment around them. But they made a mistake with me. I'm not scared of them anymore. I'm angry, and I'm not going to let them hurt you or anyone else if I can help it. Lisa had also been in contact with other families dealing with similar situations. She had created a network of people who were sharing information and supporting each other. Some had built their own defensive devices based on her designs. Others were simply relieved to know they weren't alone. There are 43 people in our network now, Lisa said, 43 families who refuse to be victims. And that number is growing every day. David realized that his wife hadn't just been preparing to defend their home. She had been building a resistance movement. Lisa had gone from victim's spouse to leader of a fight that most people didn't even know was happening. Tomorrow night, we end this, Lisa said, testing the last of her devices. And if there are more of them out there doing this to other families, we're going to stop them too. David watched his wife work, amazed by her transformation from concerned spouse to tactical genius. The beings had no idea what they had awakened when they threatened Lisa's family. They were about to find out that some humans don't just fight back, they fight to win. The device behind David's ear pulsed warm against his skin, like it was monitoring his thoughts. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he wasn't afraid of what it might be hearing. Let them listen. Let them know that David and Lisa were no longer the helpless victims they had expected to find. Tomorrow night, everything would change. Lisa's prediction was right. At exactly 13 a.m. on Friday night, every electromagnetic detector in the house started screaming. David and Lisa had been waiting in their bedroom, fully dressed and ready. They had practiced this moment dozens of times over the past week. Here we go, Lisa whispered, activating the neural shield headband and handing David his. Remember, no matter what they show you or what they try to make you feel, it's all fake. Focus on my voice. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in seconds. The familiar humming sound filled the air, but this time it was different, louder, more aggressive, like the sound of machinery working at full power. The shimmer that appeared near their dresser was bigger than David had ever seen it, easily large enough for several beings to pass through at once. 6 figures stepped into their bedroom. David had never seen more than 3 at a time before. These new ones were taller and moved with more authority. Their devices were larger and more complex, glowing with colors that hurt to look at directly. This wasn't a routine visit. This was a major operation. The tallest being, who seemed to be in charge, spoke directly into both their minds. The interference from the secondary subject ends tonight. Both subjects will be taken for immediate integration. Lisa stood up, holding a device that looked like a modified television remote. I don't think so. She pressed a button, and suddenly every piece of electronic equipment in the house activated at once. The electromagnetic pulse devices Lisa had built sent waves of energy through the air that made David's skin tingle. The beings stumbled slightly, their smooth movements becoming jerky and uncontrolled. Unexpected resistance level, one of the new beings said, sounding surprised. Technology is interfering with transport systems. Lisa pressed another button, and the signal jammers kicked in. The humming sound became erratic, starting and stopping like a car engine trying to turn over. The shimmer portal began flickering unstably. Lisa, it's working, David said, watching the beings struggle to maintain their balance. But the tall leader raised a device that looked like a crystal staff, and suddenly the interference stopped. The portal stabilized, and more beings started coming through. David counted 8, then 10. Then lost track as they filled the bedroom. Enhance the pressure required, the leader announced. Terminate the secondary subject. Continue with primary integration. 2 of the beings moved toward Lisa with devices that glowed red instead of the usual pale light. David knew instinctively that red meant danger. These weren't designed to control or paralyze. They were weapons. Lisa, run, David shouted, but his wife wasn't moving. Instead, she was smiling. Phase 2, Lisa said calmly, and pressed the 3rd button on her remote. The house exploded with light and sound. Every hidden camera, every motion detector, every piece of electronic equipment Lisa had installed over the past month activated. Simultaneously, the electromagnetic field generated by all these devices working together was powerful enough to short out the streetlights outside. The beings were no longer just stumbling. They were falling down, their technology sparking and failing. The portal began collapsing, cutting off their escape route. Several of the beings tried to use their devices on Lisa and David, but the beams of light bent and scattered in the electromagnetic chaos. Unable to find their targets, Lisa grabbed David's hand and pulled him toward the door. Come on, this is just the first part. They ran through the house as it continued to pulse with electronic energy. Every television screen showed static, every speaker crackled with interference, and every light bulb flickered like a strobe. Behind them, David could hear the beings trying to communicate with each other, but their telepathic voices were broken and fragmented. Lisa led him to the garage, where she had prepared what she called her mobile unit, their old pickup truck loaded with the most powerful devices she had built. Get in, she said, starting the engine. We're going to finish this. Finish what, Lisa? We got away. Isn't that enough? Lisa backed out of the garage and drove down their street, which was now completely dark except for their house, which continued to flash and pulse behind them. David, they're not going to stop. Tonight they brought an army because they're getting desperate. That means we're close to something important. She turned onto the highway heading toward the desert outside Phoenix. Dr. Rodriguez was right about their base of operations. While you were sleeping yesterday, I used your implant to track their signal back to its source. David touched the spot behind his ear where the device was still warm against his skin. You used it to track them. Every radio signal has a source. Lisa explained, driving faster than David had ever seen her drive before. Your implant has been sending data back to their base for weeks. I just had to figure out how to reverse the signal and follow it back. 20 minutes later, Lisa pulled off the highway onto a dirt road that led into the desert. In the distance, David could see strange lights moving in patterns that didn't match any aircraft he knew about. As they got closer, he realized they were approaching a series of low buildings that seemed to shimmer and bend in the moonlight like they weren't quite solid. Lisa, this is crazy. We don't know how many of them are in there. Lisa parked the truck behind a large rock formation and started unloading equipment. I've been monitoring their communications for 3 days. Most of their forces are still back at our house, trying to deal with the electromagnetic storm I created. This base only has a skeleton crew right now. She handed David a backpack full of devices. We're going to plant these around their facility and then activate them all at once. Dr. Rodriguez calls it a total system failure cascade. Basically, we're going to overload every piece of technology they have. David strapped on the backpack, still not quite believing they were about to assault an alien base. What if there are other people like me in there? Then we're saving them too, Lisa said simply. They approached the facility carefully, using Lisa's electromagnetic detector to avoid the perimeter sensors. The buildings were definitely not human-made. They curved and flowed like they had been grown rather than built, and they hummed with the same frequency David had been hearing for weeks. Lisa worked quickly and quietly, placing her devices at key points around the complex. Each one was the size of a lunchbox and covered in blinking lights that made David nervous. How do you know these will work? I don't, Lisa admitted. But Dr. Rodriguez's calculations suggest that if we can overload their power grid, their entire operation will shut down. No more portal technology, no more mind control devices, no more experiments on innocent people. When all 12 devices were in place, Lisa led them back to a safe distance and pulled out the master control unit. "David, once I activate this, there's no going back. Are you ready?" David looked at his wife, this incredible woman who had transformed from marketing executive to alien fighter. "In just a few weeks, Lisa, whatever happens, I want you to know that you saved my life. You saved me before any of this technology did." Lisa smiled and kissed him quickly. "Save the speeches for after we win." She pressed the activation button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the dessert lit up like someone had set off a fireworks show. The alien buildings began sparking and smoking as their technology overloaded. Pieces of equipment that had been invisible became visible as they failed, revealing a complex much larger than it had appeared from the outside. The explosion, when it came, was unlike anything David had ever seen. It wasn't fire and smoke like a normal explosion. Instead, it was pure energy, white light that turned the night into day for several seconds, before fading to reveal nothing but empty desert. Where the alien base had been. "Did we do it?" David asked, staring at the spot where the buildings had been. Lisa checked her electromagnetic detector. The readings were normal for the first time in months. "I think we did." They drove home in silence, both too exhausted to fully process what they had accomplished. When they arrived, their house was dark and quiet. The beings were gone, and according to Lisa's equipment, they hadn't left any trace behind. Over the next few days, David realized that the constant background noise in his head was completely gone. The device behind his ear had stopped working. His sleep returned to normal, and for the first time in months, he woke up in the same place he had fallen asleep. Lisa had done more than save their marriage and their lives. Through her network of contacts, word spread about what they had accomplished. Other people dealing with similar problems began building their own defensive systems. Based on Lisa's designs, the resistance movement she had started grew larger every week. Dr. Rodriguez visited them a month later, amazed by what Lisa had achieved. "In 15 years of research, you've accomplished more than I thought was possible," she told Lisa. "You've proven that they can be stopped." David returned to work, his productivity and focus completely restored. Lisa started a consulting business, helping other families defend themselves against unwanted visitors from other worlds. They never advertised what they really did, but word of mouth brought them more clients than they could handle. The beings never returned to their house, whether they had been destroyed in the explosion or simply decided that Earth was more trouble than it was worth. David never found you.